Rogerio, first of all, thanks for being here. We appreciate your participation. I would like to start talking about recapitalization that EDB Invest recently underwent. Can you elaborate on the implications of this capital increase for your organization?
Certainly. Thank you for having me. Indeed, we obtained $3.5 billion from our member countries, and we are extremely excited about it. What that means is that there is a recognition that we are on the right track in terms of being able to improve lives in Latin America and the Caribbean. Now, that money comes with high expectations. Specifically, we need to develop upon a promise, which is our Impact Plus strategy. What that means is that we're going to have to make significant efforts towards improving a climate change agenda, a gender diversity and inclusion agenda, but most importantly, we're going to originate to share. What that means is that as we do our transactions, because we have a specific know-how and skill set in impact investing, we're going to bring partner banks into the mix so that we originate, but we share those transactions with other players. Specifically, as we work on these transactional themes, small and medium-sized enterprises and how we can support them becomes a priority in our initiatives in Latin America and Caribbean.
Perfect. You mentioned the impact investing mandate, but the concept of an impact investing mandate remains elusive to some people. So can you explain what are the key elements of a genuine impact transaction?
Absolutely. So when you think about environment, social, and governance, the ESG element, environmental is relatively easy to understand. You can pursue certifications of all types. You can try to reduce water usage, improve the use of renewable energies. But thinking about the social agenda is very complicated. You may have a developer in the hospitality space that wants to work with local SMEs. They may want to activate the local value chain. But you're not able to find providers that have the quantity, the quality, or the ability to provide those products in a timely manner. So what do? When you think about impact investing, you need to assess what is the problem within your community that through your project you're able to mitigate or solve. And think about it from a personal level. Recycling. At home, you generate trash. You want to recycle. So it takes some additional effort for you to separate those products. Now you may say, is that additional effort warranted? But it supports the value of what you're trying to achieve. And the same concept applies to impact investing. The point I'm trying to make is that maintaining the status quo, that is the easy answer. So thinking through what is the problem with the community? How do you diagnose it? What are the solutions that you need to bring to the mix? That is the more difficult part. But if you are truly committed to generating economic impact, then you're going to make an effort that is aligned with your value system to think through those solutions.
Let's talk a little bit about financing. It remains constrained in the region. So how has the cost and the availability of capital impacted the development, and what is your outlook for 2024, the rest of the year?
Mm-hmm. So if you look historically in the region, we've been developing anywhere from 14,000 to 17,000 rooms in Latin America.
Wow.
Even during the pandemic, we were able to open 8,800 rooms. But the high cost of capital has finally caught up with us. And what that means is that in 2023, we only opened 8,100 properties. So developers right now, they are thinking about the return on investment that the projects generate because that is significantly more expensive. When you're dealing with a cost that is approaching double digits, between 9, 10, even 11% in certain countries, the margin of error that you have is much more limited, meaning that if there is some market trepidation, if there is some affectation to a particular project, your room to maneuver is significantly decreased. So that's the concern or the impact of high interest rates on thinking through a development pipeline. Now there's the other element, which is GDP growth. The correlation between GDP and lodging demand is very high. And historically, Latin America had been growing at a pace higher than the global averages. Right now, we're growing at roughly 2%, and that is not anticipated to materially change in the next few years. So the concern is that in an environment of slower growth than historic norms, even though lodging is going to continue to grow and expand, the pace is going to be a bit more moderate, so there is room for caution.
Based on what you just said about the cost of capital, what are your perspectives in terms of interest rates in the US and how these impact the investments in Latin America?
Absolutely. So there's already evidence that inflation is starting to slow down, which should lead into the Fed easing up interest rates this year and into 2025. Probably not at the pace that we had anticipated earlier in the year, but those reductions are going to happen. And that should promote some additional transaction activity, which is good. Fortunately, when you look at the region, they have already started reducing interest rates in advance of the Fed, and that should also promote activity. So when you look at the big picture, what is positive is that whatever debt you're obtaining today, there's an expectation that within the next 24 to 36 months, that cost of capital is going to reduce even further, which should promote more transactional activity.
Perfect. So good news ahead. What are some of the pressing needs in Latin America specifically as it relates to financing and debt capital markets?
Mm-hmm. So when you look at more mature markets like Europe and the United States, you see that there is a wider availability of financial instruments at the disposal of developers. And when you focus in Latin America and Caribbean, one of the greatest challenges is that those remain somewhat limited. Plus, there's the element that when you look at the investor base, it is also reduced. Whereas in the US, you have a lot of retail investors, you have family offices, in addition to institutional investors, in a region that is reduced. And when you look at the products that are available, think about companies that are publicly listed. You have REITs, you have debt funds, you have different instruments at the disposal of developers. Our solutions in the region, they're not as sophisticated as in those markets, and it's an area that we need to continue to explore, because ultimately, as you have more financial optionality, you provide more liquidity, and by providing more liquidity, there's more transparency in the transactional space, and therefore more value.
Perfect. Let's talk a little bit about the ESG agenda. What are some of the priority themes related to hospitality and tourism specifically, as Latin America is a great destination in terms of tourism?
Mm-hmm. So take as an example LEED certification, which is widely used. You have about 1,000 LEED hotels throughout the world. 465 of those are in the United States, 71 in Latin America, and only 4 in the Caribbean. That is not acceptable. We need to be able to do more. You take the all-inclusive segment, which is quite hot, is demanding a lot of interest from investors. And yet there are no hotels that are LEED certified that are all-inclusive. This is not a dig on the all-inclusive segment, because it is an asset class that is able to generate significant economic activity, generate a lot of employment. But there is room for us to do more on the sustainability front. Thinking about elements related to food waste, thinking about renewable energies, more empowerment of women. So when you ask me about priority themes, let's say it's everything related to climate finance, everything related to gender, diversity, and inclusion, with a specific focus on those two, diversity and inclusion, and activating the local value chain, which is supporting small and medium-sized enterprises.
And how are you guys acting in this scenario to help unlock this potential?
So there are a variety of instruments that we can make accessible to our clients. The concept of blended finance, which is finding pools of capital with a lower cost, as long as you're meeting certain thresholds as it relates to energy use. You're able to incentivize those practices by bringing debt that is cheaper than traditional sources. We also have a significant effort around advisory services, and what that means is that maybe you want to pursue an initiative around gender or activation of the local value chain, but you're not an expert in those fields. So we have a significant amount of know-how that we can bring to the table, not only with our internal resources, but external resources to help you execute upon those initiatives and interests.